Hello, welcome back to the studio. Today I thought I'd work from a photograph again. I did one previously and I think that went down rather well with you. But this time, well, let's have a look at our canvas before we start painting. Because as you see, it's actually quite a lovely orangey warm painting. And a grey canvas isn't going to be much use to us. So I want to talk to you just for a moment about using a toned canvas. This can make a huge difference to the final appearance of your paintings. So maybe in future, if you're working from photographs, just have a little thought before you start that maybe a grey or a white canvas isn't so useful. Anyway, let's get on with the painting. So relax in those comfy chairs and get that notepad out. Happy painting, people.
So here's my canvas, and I could be using oil paint to tone it. In this case, Bob Ross Dark Sienna. But for ease of use, I'm going to be using this. And this is an acrylic paint. And this is burnt sienna. Very similar, a nice orangey brown colour. I'll also be using a piece of foam sponge just to rub it in. I've added a few drops of water to my paint just to thin it slightly. It doesn't really matter how you apply this. Just make sure you let it dry completely. So here's my palette. Not many colours today. And of course I'll be using this colour, dark sienna, to do some basic drawing with. I use a few drops of odorless thinners and a small round brush. Just a drop is all you need. I'm going to thin my dark sienna to make it sort of more like a wash. I don't want too much thick heavy paint, I want it to dry quickly. Here's my reference picture, and really there are only two lines I need to know. The horizon line and that main wave. I use another brush just to measure the distance from the base of my canvas, just a little above halfway. I'll put a little mark on there and measure the other side. Now, it's a neat little trick. You can use your brush and a finger just to measure up from the base of the canvas. Just want to make sure it's fairly level. I'll darken that slightly so you can see it more clearly. Now let's look at this line. Quite close to the top on the left and probably about halfway down to the base of my canvas. So that's an easy mark to put on. And maybe an inch down at this end. Now let's drop in the basic shape of the wave. I get to about here, and you see there's a little step in the wave. It's a nice little feature, easy to overlook. But I want to include that, a feature, in my painting. Now let's add a little mark where we think the sunrise or sunset is on our painting, about a third the way from the side of the canvas. I think about there looks right. While I'm here, I'll just drop in a couple of other small details, but again, this is very basic. Leave it to dry completely. As you see, it's still too wet. But within half an hour, it's dry enough to paint on. I'm going to be using Bob Ross oil paints throughout this painting. And I'm going to start off with this, Bob Ross liquid clear oil paint. I keep a small amount in an airtight container, and I'm going to be using an old Bob Ross 1-inch landscape brush to apply a very thin coating to my canvas. You can go directly over your little sketch, and if you don't scrub too hard, it'll stay put. This is one of the beauties of painting in oils. Now let's mix up some colour. The first one I'm going to be mixing is a brilliant orange colour, Indian yellow, and a touch of bright red. Whew, wow, look at that. It's a shocking orange colour, but one that I think will suit our painting very well. The other colour I'm going to mix up is a nice lavender tone. This is Alizarin crimson with a touch of phthalo blue. Not too much blue, mind. I made that mistake on another painting recently, so I want to be just to the crimson side. I'm going to use this old 1-inch brush again, and I'm giving it a dry clean. Now, use your reference photograph for inspiration. Remember, you're not marrying it, you're just using it for inspiration. And drop in the first real oil colour to your painting. Just drop it in where you think you need it most. The horizon line is the obvious place for some of that bright orangey colour. Let's add a hair more of that red colour. Whew, wow, that really lights things up, doesn't it? What a lovely colour for a painting. I also want some of these colours down here on the beach. At this stage we are blocking in our painting. No detail here, just basic patches of colour. We don't need to be too accurate when we're just laying out our paintings, and it's a bit of a trap sometimes we tend to fall into, thinking that we've got to get every detail right. Now let's add some of the lavender colour. Problem is I can't use that orangey brush because, well, lavender and orange make almost black. So I've switched to a fresh brush for this step. Once again, I'm just going to block in where I think the colour needs to be strongest first. I'll do the corners, and that'll really draw my eye to the centre of my painting. Top tip: when adding these colours to my canvas, I make sure to try and retain some of the original background colour. Here you see I'm using some of the Sienna colour from the background canvas to peek through. And if you look at my reference photograph, you'll see here's those little bits of colour. It's amazing what that toned canvas can do to help our painting. I'll use a small amount of time-lapse for this process of blocking in. I refer to my reference photograph very often. I especially want to darken this area at the base of the wave where there is a lovely deep shadow. I add a little bit of colour down in the bottom corners as well. The next stage of my painting is to start to develop this sky with a bit more detail. And there's a lot to choose from here. And this is something you have to be careful of. What do you include and what do you leave out? It would be very easy to overcomplicate things. So let's work with a very little colour and see how far we can get. I'm using some white, but that's a little bit too stark. I need to warm this colour up. I'll use some Indian yellow and a touch of the red colour here just to tone things down. I think that's a better colour to start with. You'll also notice I'm using a Bob Ross fan brush for this. Now let's establish where that bright spot's going to be in my sky, right where that little mark is. I think that's about right. Now again, use the reference photograph for inspiration. I drop in the suggestion of a few little clouds. Again, I'm just looking to block in basic shapes here, no detail. Now, no cheating on this one. I want you to write down how many times you think I reload my brush to paint this sky. Once, twice, 3 or more times. Let's see. I'm going to carry on adding detail here and there. As you see, I'm starting to pick up some of that lavender colour. So I'll move away from that area. I'll scrub some more colour in to my background sky. You see, every once in a while I pause to get a good look at what I'm supposed to be painting. Learning to paint what you see is a skill that takes time to develop. You can only really learn it through practice. And I've had lots of that, and yet still my imagination, well, it can take over sometimes. And I don't mind too much, as long as I capture the basic spirit of the painting. Now, notice what I'm doing next. I'm gathering some of the dark colour from the corners of my canvas, and I'm putting in some of the other little cloud details. moving paint around on my canvas is something that I often do, unless I'm painting a very big feature like a mountain or a cloud. But for these sort of really soft background sort of skies, I think just moving a bit of paint around is a neat little trick, and it's one that you should think about doing sometimes with your own paintings. So, have you been keeping count how many times I loaded my brush? You might be surprised. So the answer is just once. The initial pale colour I put on my brush is all I used to complete this entire sky. Everything else was already there. I just moved it around a bit. Now, time to refine our painting a little more. I gave my brush a nice dry clean, and I've gone back into some of my brighter colours here. I just want to really sort of add a little bit more of a sparkle in a few spots. Notice how I gently blend these colours out from the centre of the light spot, which is going to be where the sun is either rising or setting. I haven't quite decided that bit yet. I'll add a few little rays of light from the sun, and I think a little more of a tidy up, maybe under here. Yes, just a little bit of a touch up with that lovely red colour. Now, let's put in some brighter edges to these clouds to get that nice expansive look to our sky. Just picking out an edge here and there is what really gives this painting its real zing. Now, there's a lovely sort of rough sort of looking cloud shape here, and again I just use the corner of my fan brush and loosely block in where I think this cloud is going to be. Nothing too solid here. There's more sort of smoke and mirrors going on with this painting than meets the eye. I'll come back and reblend some of these edges if they're a little bit too bold. Let's drop in the sun. For this I'm going to be using a very artistic tool, the end of my finger of course. I take a little bit of that off-white colour, maybe just a hair brighter than the sky, but only just a hair brighter. And right here, just dab it on the canvas. Don't fiddle around with it too much though, because well, they have a tendency to grow, and that initial touch of paint is probably the best you're going to get it. Now with just two hairs and very little air, I flick out a few rays of light onto the surface of the sea. Again, try not to overdo it. I nearly did. I think it's time we stop playing with our sky and actually painted a seascape. So I've loaded a little more of that pale yellow colour onto my fan brush. Once again, I'm just going to loosely block in the position of various features. I know where the big wave's going to be, so I really just need some filler waves for the background. Small amounts of paint again. That toned canvas is doing most of the work for us, but here's the thing I've spotted. Somehow my horizon line started to taper off. It's one of the problems, I'm afraid, when you're painting standing to one side of the canvas so that the camera can be in prime position. As you paint across the canvas, your hand tends to fall away to the right. Well, it's my excuse, and that's what I'm going to stick to. As I work forward in my painting, I add more and more little touches of light. Don't forget though, there is a thing called a light trail. That's where the light from the distance comes to the foreground. It follows quite a predictable path. I didn't quite get it right. So make sure you watch the whole video so you can get all those little details right at the very end.
So here's my painting so far, and it's coming together quite well. Now, one thing that I'm going to draw your attention to in the last little section is how little paint I used. In fact, I used almost none. I used most of the colour that was already on my canvas and then just added a few subtle hints to it. Now, it may come as a bit of a surprise to you, but when I put that dark sienna wash colour on there, I'd actually completed probably maybe half of the initial painting. Just using that dark sienna colour gave me a real leg up with this painting. So again, a toned canvas was really in this case quite a good move. Now the other thing I'm going to get you to look at on here is look at that photograph, and you see that This is a very long, low photograph, and I'm on a slightly sort of more upright canvas, slightly more sort of square. But this does something rather nice for my painting. It accentuates those angles, whereas this is long and low. This is much more aggressive, so it really draws your eye quickly to that spot. So sometimes changing the shape of your canvas as opposed to using the shape that fits your photograph can be a benefit. Now, on to the essential step number 4. I've lost count really, so we'll just keep on adding steps to our painting.
Now it's time to refine my waves with a little bit more shadow. You'll notice that I work backwards and forwards between highlights and shadows, building up my waves as I go. It's important, I think, to try and do the two things sort of almost simultaneously if you can. It's very easy to over-highlight a painting and then realise you've overdone it, and then you've left yourself no room for putting in a shadow line here and there. I'm just correcting my horizon line now. I'm using another brush, another one of my fan brushes, just to double check that I've got this level right. It doesn't take long to work it out, and with a little bit of a touch here and there, I soon managed to get it, well, pretty much perfect. Now, I'm just going to add a little bit more shadow to the sides of my painting. Again, this is a neat trick if you want to draw your eye towards the middle of a painting. Darken those edges, draw your eye towards the centre. It lends a huge amount of atmosphere to your paintings. Even a dry painting can be glazed. Give it a try sometime. Now, a few of these little shadows are a bit strong and maybe a little bigger than I wanted them. So here's a neat trick, and you've seen me do this before on other videos. I use a little cotton bud just to smooth things out, rub things away and blend them into that background. Even this edge here is a little bit strong, so I'll just soften it slightly. There, I think that's about right. I'm going to try and put an eye into my wave. That's a little transparency. I'll use a cotton bud first to see if I can remove some paint, but no, not quite enough. So I wrap a baby wipe round a cotton bud. It removes all the paint, and if you rub a bit harder, you can actually go back down to the canvas. There. I've changed brushes to a Bob Ross Filbert brush, and I've picked up again some more of that very pale yellow colour, maybe a tiny bit brighter. And I want to just light up this little eye of the wave. I scrub in a little bit of colour, but I try and keep a little bit of a dark edge to it, save some of that shadow. Now, later on you'll see that, well, I change things a bit. This becomes a bit too sort of bold. And, well, yes, I think that is just one step too far. I'll use my finger to smudge it out. I'm going to use that filbert brush to blend and shape the waves. I come back with my fan brush and some of that dark colour and block that out. Because I'm only using small amounts of paint, it's very easy to make changes without getting into too big a pickle. Now back to some more curving shapes. Think about how the wave forms and drifts up the beach. As I pick up some more colour, it goes a nice sort of blue-grey colour. Perfect for a shadow. I'll be using a lot of this sort of blue-grey colour in this part of my painting. Under all these waves, I just want the detail of a wave without too much of a highlight. If you enjoy watching my tutorials, don't forget, give this painting a little thumbs up. It lets YouTube know I'm doing something which you're enjoying. It also helps the channel grow, and the more it grows, the more people get to see my work. If you want to subscribe to the channel, it's free. But don't forget, when you do subscribe, hit the little bell icon. That way every Sunday when I release a new painting, you'll get a little notification. Now, let's add some tiny flecks of light to the tops of a few waves. Again, I'm using my filbert brush and just the tiniest amount of bright colour. A little fleck here, And a little touch there is all that's needed. I think a little bit right here. I want to get my eye to look at this little spot, and I think that's about right with a little flick of the finger. Perfect. I'm even going to add a few little splashes to the crest of my wave. Do a little and stand back. I think that's about as much as that little wave can take. I'll add a little bit more light to this foreground section of my painting. Again, remember that light trail from the distance to the foreground. And this is where I start having a few little problems. I think I'm slightly offline. Yes, I've drifted too far to the right, but it's okay, I can fix that. I'm going to carry on adding lots of little shadows into this foreground. I'm just playing with the paint at this stage. I don't really need to do anything more detailed. I just try and bring my painting to a nice conclusion. I'll move a little of that dark colour into the centre of my painting as well. Let's add a few more little shadow lines on the other side, under a few waves here and there. Now, one of the most essential stages of a painting is the time you spend not painting, just looking. I find it best to sit back, a cup of tea, in my comfy chair and just ponder what I've done. If there's any weaknesses or any strengths, anything that needs attention. So I'm going to take a small break, but I'll see you in a moment.
So here's my finished painting. Well, finished insofar as this is the first sitting. Hold it a moment, folks. That other guy sounded like he was trying to wrap the whole video up before it was really finished. That's right, I told you I was going to do some little changes on my video, and I was sort of skipping ahead. Well, I couldn't resist it. After the camera stopped rolling, I started fiddling with my painting. Now, I didn't have the cameras on, so I didn't catch all the detail, but of course it actually made a few little changes. I changed the eye of the wave, I filled it in, and I started putting on that light trail. So I thought I'll bring you back and show you the final finished painting and how I corrected that light trail problem I was getting myself into. So keep sitting tight, there's a little bit more to come.
Let's look at our reference photograph for this light trail. From the background sun right through to this beach, you can see there's a definite path. Let's have a look at our painting, and you can see the problem. I start off okay, but then suddenly, well, I jump to the left. That looks a little odd, so I really need to change this angle. I could paint things out, or I could just add some colour here. I'm using my Bob Ross liner brush and some thinned out light yellow paint, and I'll add a little more brightness to this side of my painting. I just really want to swing things to the left, but do take care not to put too much colour here in the shadows. It doesn't take long to build up that light. Now for an extra twist, let's add some sparkle to these little waves. This is a neat technique for getting that little shimmering effect. Tiny little bit of paint on the end of your liner brush and just paint a few little bars through some of those light areas. You only need a few little flicks, and again, don't overdo it. Stand back often. Once you've got a few on there, the effect starts to work really well. I'm going to add a few extra sparkles to the top of this wave as well. Just a few dots of foam in very, very bright colour. This is probably the whitest colour I've used, but even then, still not pure white. I want to just add one more detail to my wave, and that's to add a little bit of detail in the shadow. I've got some of my lavender colour and I've mixed it with some white to make a very pale colour. And just here in the shadows I hint at the suggestion of a little detail, but again, don't get it too bright. That looks a bit bright there. I'll use my magic eraser there to fix it. And before you know it, you have a painting from a photograph.
So there we have it. a lovely seascape painted using a photograph for inspiration, and I used Bob Ross oil paints throughout. In fact, I don't think there's much else I could add to this painting.
What about seagulls?
Yes, seagulls. I forgot about them. How about just watching the next video? That's it.
I think that's the one.